There is a quiet kind of pain that does not shout, yet echoes through every corner of your soul. The pain of realizing that the very people who once stood beside you have begun to stand against you. It is a strange feeling, isn't it? To be misunderstood by those who know your story, to be doubted by those who once believed in you, to feel a distance growing where there was once warmth. But before you let that weight bend your spirit, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what if their change is not the end of your story, but the beginning of your becoming? There is a particular kind of heartbreak that does not come crashing like a storm, but settles slowly, like dust in a quiet room. It is the pain that rises when the ones who once knew your laughter begin to question your worth, when the same voices that encouraged you start to echo with doubt. You try to make sense of it, turning memories over in your mind, wondering where the shift began. And the truth is, it feels heavier because it comes from a place you once called safe. It feels deeper because it carries the weight of trust that was never meant to be broken. You see, betrayal from strangers can be dismissed with distance, but betrayal from your own lingers. It lingers in the spaces where love used to live. It lingers in the way you begin to second guess your own steps, your own voice, your own reflection. You start asking questions you never asked before. Was I too much? Did I change too much? Did I outgrow something I was supposed to hold on to? And in that questioning, you begin to shrink little by little, trying to find a version of yourself that feels acceptable again. But understand this gently and clearly. The pain you feel is not a sign that you are weak. It is a sign that you loved deeply, that you trusted fully, that you allowed yourself to be seen without armor. And there is no shame in that. The wound is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is proof that something meaningful once existed. Yet not everything that once felt like home is meant to remain your shelter forever. Sometimes people grow uncomfortable not because you have done them wrong, but because you have begun to do yourself right. Your courage begins to highlight their fears. Your progress begins to remind them of their stillness. And instead of celebrating your rise, they resist it because it forces them to confront parts of themselves they have long avoided. So what you interpret as hatred is often their unspoken struggle, their quiet insecurity, their inability to meet you where you now stand. And still, knowing this does not erase the hurt. It does not make the distance feel lighter overnight. There will be moments when your chest feels tight, when the silence between you and them speaks louder than any argument ever could. There will be days when you miss who they used to be, or perhaps who you believed they were. But do not let nostalgia convince you to return to a place where you are no longer growing. Let the pain teach you, not break you. Let it remind you that your worth cannot be rooted in the approval of others, even if those others once meant everything to you. You are allowed to grieve what changed, but you are also allowed to continue becoming who you are meant to be. And sometimes the most powerful step forward is taken not with certainty, but with the quiet decision to no longer chase understanding from those who have chosen to misunderstand you. There is a quiet assumption we carry in our hearts that the people who have seen us the longest must surely see us the clearest. We believe that familiarity creates understanding, that shared history guarantees respect, that time builds an unbreakable bridge between souls. But life has a way of revealing something far more complex. Just because someone has witnessed your journey does not mean they have taken the time to understand it. Just because they know your name, your past, your struggles, does not mean they truly see who you are becoming. You can sit in a room full of people who know your story and still feel completely unseen. They remember who you used to be, the version of you that fit neatly into their expectations, the version that made them comfortable. And when you begin to evolve, when your thoughts deepen, your boundaries strengthen, your vision expands, they struggle to recognize you. Not because you have become unrecognizable, but because they have chosen to hold on to an outdated image of you. Understanding requires more than memory. It requires presence. It asks for empathy, for curiosity, for the willingness to grow alongside someone instead of confining them to who they once were. And not everyone is willing to do that work. Some people would rather cling to the simplicity of who you used to be than stretch themselves to meet who you are now. So they misinterpret your silence as pride, your growth as distance, your confidence as arrogance. And that misunderstanding can feel deeply isolating. It can make you question whether you are asking for too much, whether being seen for who you are today is an unreasonable desire. You may find yourself trying to explain, trying to translate your heart into words they will accept, hoping that if you just say it the right way, they will finally understand. But the truth is, understanding cannot be forced. It cannot be begged for or performed into existence. It must be chosen. There comes a moment when you must release the need to be fully understood by those who have already decided who you are, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Because constantly explaining yourself to people who refuse to listen will only drain the very essence you are trying to protect. You were not meant to live your life in translation, shrinking your truth into pieces small enough for others to digest. This does not mean you stop loving them. It does not mean you erase the memories or deny the connection that once felt real. It simply means you begin to accept that their understanding has limits, and those limits are not your responsibility to fix. You can honor what was while still choosing what is best for you now. And as you move forward, you will begin to encounter people who do not just hear your words, but feel them, people who do not need long explanations to recognize your truth. With them, you will not feel the need to defend your growth or justify your changes. You will simply exist, and in that existence, you will feel something rare and beautiful, being understood, not because you made yourself smaller, but because they were willing to see you as you are. There is a moment in your journey when your growth stops being something people quietly admire and starts becoming something they cannot comfortably stand beside. At first, it is subtle, a change in tone, a hesitation in their support, a silence where encouragement used to live. And you wonder what shifted, what you did wrong, why the same progress that once felt celebrated now feels like a problem. But the truth is not as personal as it feels. It is deeper than that. Growth has a way of revealing things people are not ready to face within themselves. When you begin to move forward, to heal, to elevate your thinking, your discipline, your purpose, you become a living reminder of what is possible. And while that can inspire some, it unsettles others. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because your evolution quietly confronts their comfort. It reflects the dreams they postponed, the risks they avoided, the change they resisted. And not everyone knows how to sit with that reflection. So instead of looking inward, they look at you. They question your motives. They downplay your progress. They call your growth too much, too fast, or unnecessary. What they are really saying without the courage to admit it is that your rise makes them aware of their own stillness. Your discipline highlights their inconsistency. Your courage exposes their fear. And rather than face that discomfort, they try to dim your light so they can feel at ease again. It is a quiet kind of resistance, but it cuts deep because it comes from familiar places. These are not strangers casting doubt from a distance. These are people who once stood close enough to witness your struggle. And now, as you begin to step into your strength, they struggle to adjust to the version of you that no longer fits the old narrative they held on to. But you must understand this with clarity. Your growth is not an attack on anyone else. It is a commitment to yourself. It is the result of nights you chose discipline over distraction, healing over denial, purpose over comfort. You did not come this far to make others comfortable at the cost of your own becoming. So do not apologize for evolving. Do not slow down just to maintain connections that only survived when you were smaller. The right people will not feel threatened by your growth. They will feel inspired by it. They will not compete with your light. They will stand beside it and shine in their own way. And yes, it may hurt to realize that not everyone can come with you. It may feel lonely at times, walking a path that fewer people understand. But there is strength in continuing anyway, in choosing to rise even when it creates distance. because your journey was never meant to be measured by how comfortable it keeps others. It was meant to be defined by how honestly you step into who you are becoming. And if your growth exposes insecurities in others, let it be a reminder not to shrink, but to keep expanding with grace, with courage, and with a quiet confidence that refuses to dim for anyone. There is something deeply unsettling about recognizing a face you have known for years, yet feeling a presence that no longer feels the same. It is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is found in the pauses between words, in the absence of warmth where it once lived, in the subtle shift of energy that your heart notices before your mind can explain. You sit across from them, listening, responding, smiling even. But somewhere within you, a quiet voice whispers that something has changed. Familiarity can give the illusion of permanence. We believe that because someone has been part of our past, they will naturally remain aligned with our present. But people change, emotions shift, and intentions evolve, sometimes in ways that are never spoken aloud. A face may remain the same, but the energy it carries can become unfamiliar, distant, or even heavy. And that is where the confusion begins, because you are no longer responding to who they were, but to who they have quietly become. It can make you question your instincts. You may tell yourself you are overthinking, that nothing has really changed, that history should matter more than a feeling you cannot fully explain. So you ignore the discomfort. You continue showing up the same way, offering the same trust, the same openness, hoping that things will return to what they once were. But energy does not lie, even when words try to cover it. What you feel is often the truth trying to reach you before reality fully reveals itself. Sometimes that unfamiliar energy carries jealousy that was never there before, or resentment that quietly grew in the shadows. Sometimes it is distance, born from differences that neither of you chose to address, and other times it is simply misalignment. Two people no longer walking in the same direction, yet still trying to stand in the same space. Whatever it may be, it creates a silent tension, one that cannot be resolved by pretending not to notice it. And this is where your strength is tested, not in how tightly you hold on to what is familiar, but in how honestly you respond to what you feel. It takes courage to accept that not every connection is meant to remain the same. It takes awareness to recognize when comfort has turned into confusion, when closeness has turned into quiet distance. And it takes self-respect to stop forcing harmony where energy no longer aligns. You do not have to turn cold, and you do not have to respond with anger. Sometimes the most powerful response is a gentle shift within yourself, a step back, a recalibration, a decision to protect your peace without creating unnecessary conflict. You can still wish them well, still honor what once was without ignoring what now is. Because holding on to someone purely out of familiarity can slowly disconnect you from yourself. As you grow, your awareness sharpens. You begin to notice what drains you, what feels forced, what no longer resonates with the person you are becoming. And that awareness is not something to fear, it is something to trust, because it guides you towards spaces where your energy is not questioned, where your presence is not tolerated but valued, where you do not have to decode emotions hidden beneath the surface. So when familiar faces begin to feel unfamiliar, do not rush to deny it. Sit with it, understand it, and then choose yourself with quiet confidence. Not every shift needs confrontation, and not every realization needs an explanation. Some truths are simply meant to be accepted, so you can move forward with clarity, protecting the peace you have worked so hard to build. There comes a subtle pressure, often unspoken yet deeply felt, that urges you to become smaller than you truly are. It does not arrive as a command, but as a suggestion woven into reactions, into silences, into the way people respond when you fully express yourself. You begin to notice that your honesty makes some uncomfortable, your confidence feels like too much to others, your ambition seems excessive in spaces that have grown used to your restraint, and slowly, Without even realizing it, you start adjusting, softening your voice, dimming your light, holding back parts of yourself just to keep the peace. At first, it feels like maturity, like you are being considerate, like you are choosing harmony over conflict. But over time, it begins to feel heavy because shrinking is not the same as growing. It is not alignment. It is quiet self-abandonment. You are not evolving. You are editing yourself to fit into expectations that were never designed for your full expression. And the more you do it, the more disconnected you feel from who you truly are. The truth is, acceptance that requires you to become less than yourself is not acceptance at all. It is a condition, a silent agreement that you will only be welcomed as long as you remain within certain limits. But you were never meant to live within limits that deny your essence. You were never meant to measure your worth by how comfortable you make others feel. Your voice, your ideas, your presence, they were not given to you to be hidden or reduced. And yet the fear is real. The fear that if you stand fully in who you are, you might lose people. The fear that your truth might create distance, that your growth might unsettle the very connections you once relied on. So you find yourself at a crossroads between being accepted for a version of yourself that is incomplete or risking rejection for showing up whole. But consider this gently. What is the cost of being accepted if it means losing yourself in the process? What is the value of belonging if it requires you to silence your truth, to question your instincts, to hold back your potential? That kind of belonging is fragile because it is built on a version of you that is not real. And anything built on that foundation will always require you to keep pretending. There is a different kind of strength in choosing not to shrink. It is not loud or forceful. It is quiet and steady. It is the decision to speak when your voice shakes, to stand firm when others expect you to bend, to honor your growth even when it makes others uncomfortable. It is understanding that your expansion is not something to apologize for, but something to embody with grace. And yes, not everyone will understand it. Some will resist it, others may walk away from it. But those who are meant to be in your life will not ask you to become less. They will meet you where you are. They will respect your fullness. They will recognize your authenticity without feeling threatened by it. So allow yourself to take up space. Allow yourself to be seen in your entirety without constant self-editing, because you were not created to fit into spaces that require you to disappear. You were created to grow, to expand, to become. And that journey will always demand that you choose yourself, even when acceptance is no longer guaranteed. There is a moment in your awareness when you begin to see that what others express toward you is not always a clear mirror of who you are, but sometimes a reflection of what they carry within themselves. Words spoken in anger, subtle remarks wrapped in criticism, or even the quiet distance people create can feel personal at first, as though they are directed at your essence. But with time and clarity, you begin to recognize a deeper pattern, that not every reaction is rooted in truth, and not every judgment is anchored in understanding. People view you through the lens of their own experiences, their insecurities, their unresolved emotions, and their expectations of how life should be. When something within you disrupts that internal framework, your confidence, your progress, your independence, it can trigger discomfort that they may not know how to process. Instead of examining that discomfort within themselves, they project it outward. And in that projection, their perception of you becomes blurred, shaped less by reality and more by their inner world. It is important to remember that someone's inability to celebrate you does not diminish your achievements. Their resistance to your growth does not invalidate the effort, discipline, or resilience it took for you to reach this point. What they call too much may simply be unfamiliar to them. What they label as arrogance may be confidence they have not yet learned to embrace within themselves. What they perceive as distance may simply be your healthy boundaries beginning to take form. When you understand this, you begin to loosen the grip of unnecessary self-doubt. You stop internalizing every opinion as a verdict on your worth. Instead, you learn to observe without absorbing, to listen without losing yourself in the noise of others' projections. This shift does not make you indifferent. It makes you discerning. You begin to separate what is constructive from what is merely reflective, what is meant to guide you from what is simply a projection of someone else's limitations. And yet, this awareness requires balance. It does not mean dismissing every form of feedback or assuming that all criticism is invalid. Growth still depends on humility, on the willingness to learn, to reflect, to adjust when necessary. But discernment allows you to filter voices, recognizing which ones come from a place of honesty and care, and which ones are shaped by comparison, insecurity, or misunderstanding. There will always be voices around you. Some will question your direction, others will misunderstand your intentions, and a few may even speak from a place of hidden resentment. But none of these voices should become louder than your own inner clarity. Because when you are grounded in who you are and what you stand for, external negativity loses its power to define you. So when you encounter resistance, instead of immediately asking, "What is wrong with me?" you can gently ask, "What might this response be revealing about them?" That question creates space to breathe, to observe, and to remain centered. It allows you to protect your peace without hardening your heart. In the end, understanding that hate is often a reflection rather than a truth gives you freedom. It frees you from carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. It allows you to move forward with clarity, knowing that your worth is not determined by distorted perceptions, but by the quiet, consistent truth of who you are becoming. There is a quiet truth that many people resist accepting, not because it is unclear, but because it requires them to let go of something they once held close. Outgrowing people is not an act of rejection, nor is it a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a natural part of becoming. As you move through life, your thoughts deepen, your values sharpen, your awareness expands, and with that growth, your alignment with certain individuals begins to shift. At one point, those connections may have felt effortless, even essential. You shared the same spaces, the same conversations, the same perspectives that made you feel understood and grounded. But as you begin to evolve, you no longer see the world in the exact same way. Your priorities change, your boundaries strengthen, your vision becomes clearer. What once felt comfortable may now feel limiting, not because it has lost its value, but because you have moved beyond the version of yourself that needed it. This process can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. There is often a sense of guilt that accompanies the realization that someone you once cared deeply about no longer fits into your current path. You may find yourself holding on to conversations that no longer resonate, or forcing connections that now require effort instead of flow. But growth is not meant to be confined by loyalty to the past. It asks you to honor what was, while also making space for what is becoming. Outgrowing someone does not mean you never valued them. It does not erase the shared moments, the lessons learned, or the experiences that shaped you along the way. In fact, those connections often played an important role in your development, but their purpose may have been to accompany you for a season, not necessarily for the entirety of your journey. And recognizing that allows you to release without resentment, to separate with understanding rather than conflict. There is also a deeper layer to this evolution. As you grow, you may notice that certain environments, conversations, or dynamics begin to feel misaligned with your energy. This is not something you force, it is something you observe. Your intuition becomes more attuned to what supports your growth and what drains it. And gradually, without needing dramatic decisions, you begin to gravitate toward spaces that reflect who you are now, rather than who you used to be. Letting go can be difficult, especially when history is involved. But holding on to connections out of habit, obligation, or fear of change can quietly hold you back from fully stepping into your next phase. Growth requires space. mental, emotional, and sometimes relational space to expand into something new. And that space is created not by force, but by release. In time, you begin to understand that outgrowing people is not a loss to grieve, but a transformation to accept. It is a sign that you are not stagnant, that you are not confined to a fixed version of yourself. Instead, you are moving, evolving, and aligning with a life that reflects your current truth. And in that realization, there is a quiet kind of peace, the understanding that every ending within relationships that no longer fit is not a failure, but a natural step forward in your becoming. There is a moment in your journey when the voices around you begin to compete with the voice within you. Doubt can come in many forms. It may arrive as a subtle suggestion, a dismissive comment, or a repeated pattern of questioning that slowly seeps into your thoughts. When it comes from others, especially those whose opinions you once valued, it can feel heavier than expected. Their words may linger longer than they should, not because they hold absolute truth, but because they touch areas of uncertainty you have not yet fully confronted within yourself. In those moments, it becomes easy to look outward for validation, to measure your worth through the lens of approval, agreement, or recognition. You may find yourself adjusting your decisions, second-guessing your instincts, or hesitating before taking steps forward, all in an attempt to avoid criticism or rejection. But living in response to doubt, whether it is yours or someone else's, can quietly disconnect you from your own inner guidance. It places the control of your direction into the hands of perceptions that were never meant to define your reality. Self-worth, however, is something that must be nurtured from within. It is not built on applause, nor is it sustained by agreement. It is formed in the quiet moments when you choose to believe in yourself despite uncertainty, when you continue forward even without guarantees, when you honor your effort without waiting for external confirmation. It grows each time you recognize your value not as something assigned by others, but as something inherent in who you are. When self-worth becomes stronger than doubt, something shifts. The need to explain yourself to everyone begins to fade. The urgency to be understood by those who are committed to misunderstanding you loses its grip. You start to realize that not every opinion deserves equal weight in your life. Some voices may reflect experience and wisdom, while others may simply reflect limitation, fear, or projection. Learning to distinguish between the two allows you to protect your mental and emotional space without closing yourself off from growth. There will still be moments when doubt appears, both internally and externally. That is part of being human, but instead of allowing it to take root, you can acknowledge it without surrendering to it. You can hear it without internalizing it, because doubt, when left unchallenged, grows louder over time. But when met with a grounded sense of self-worth, it begins to lose its influence. Choosing to let your self-worth speak louder does not mean ignoring feedback or becoming resistant to growth. It means approaching life from a place of inner stability rather than constant validation seeking. It means trusting your journey even when others question it, believing in your direction even when it is not fully understood, and continuing forward with a quiet confidence that does not rely on external permission. Over time, this inner strength reshapes the way you move through the world. You begin to act with more clarity, make decisions with more certainty, and stand firm in spaces where you once felt unsure. And in doing so, you create a life that is guided not by the noise of doubt, but by the steady presence of self-respect, self-trust, and a deep awareness of your own worth. There comes a point in your life when you realize that waiting for everyone to understand you is a waiting that will never truly end. Opinions will always exist, shaped by perspectives, experiences, and limitations that are not your own. Some will question your direction, others will misunderstand your intentions, and a few may never come to terms with the path you have chosen. If you pause every time you are misunderstood, if you hesitate every time someone disagrees, your journey will begin to lose its momentum, not because you are incapable, but because you have allowed external voices to interrupt an inner calling that was never meant to be negotiated. Your purpose is not something that requires universal approval. It does not ask for permission, nor does it wait for consensus. It reveals itself quietly at first through a sense of direction, a pull towards something greater, a feeling that persists even when doubt tries to overshadow it. And the more you ignore that inner pull, the more unsettled you feel, as though a part of you is waiting to be acknowledged. That is because purpose, when genuine, does not disappear simply because it is challenged. It remains steady and patient, asking you to return to it. At times, the resistance you face from others can feel discouraging. You may interpret their doubt as a sign to stop, their criticism as a reason to reconsider, their lack of support as confirmation that you are on the wrong path. But not every form of resistance is a signal to retreat. Sometimes it is a natural response to something unfamiliar, something that stretches beyond what others are used to seeing or believing. And if you allow that resistance to define your steps, you may find yourself walking away from the very direction that was meant to shape your growth. Rising in the presence of doubt requires a certain kind of courage, not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that continues quietly, consistently, even when no one is watching, even when no one is cheering. It is the discipline to stay committed to your purpose when validation is absent, when recognition is delayed, when progress feels slow. It is understanding that the value of your journey is not determined by how quickly others acknowledge it, but by how faithfully you remain aligned with it. There will always be voices that try to place limits on what you can achieve. Some of those voices may come from a place of concern, others from misunderstanding, and some from their own unfulfilled expectations. But none of them carry the final authority over your life. That authority belongs to you, to your decisions, your persistence, your willingness to keep moving forward even when the path is not fully clear. Rising anyway does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to be confined by it. It means acknowledging the challenges while still choosing to move through them. It means accepting that your purpose may not always be visible to others, but remaining committed to it because it is clear to you. And in doing so, you begin to build a sense of inner trust that does not rely on external approval to stay strong. Over time, as you continue to rise, something shifts. The same voices that once questioned you may begin to observe you differently. The path that once seemed uncertain starts to reveal its direction. And even if their opinions do not change, your relationship with them does, because you are no longer waiting to be understood in order to move forward. You are already in motion, guided by a purpose that remains greater than any opinion placed upon it.